רבה כמה דף מ"ה משנה שור שהוא יוצא להסתכל וקדישו בעליו אינו מוקדש, שחטו בשרו אסור, ואם עד שלא נגמר דינו הקדישו בעליו מוקדש, ואם שחטו בשרו mutar. An ox that is, or the verdict was already given, that this ox, because it killed someone, it must get stoned. And now it's after the verdict, but it's on its way to get stoned, it hasn't gotten stoned yet. And the owner makes it hekdesh. It doesn't work. It's not hekdesh because the verdict already was given down. So this animal is prohibited. Behana'ah. You could have no benefit from it. Anything that you have no benefit from has no value. You can't sell it. You can't even give it away. So therefore, since it has zero value, you're making hekdesh. You're saying, I'm going to donate $0 to the Bet HaMikdash. That has no value. This, it's like just donating air. So therefore, there has no effect. We're not going to say, oh, stop the presses, don't do the stoning. This animal is a holy animal. We can't kill it. That doesn't happen. There is no hekdesh. Similarly, if the owner does shechita on it before it gets niskal, one is not allowed to eat or benefit from that meat, because this is basically a dead ox walking. Since the verdict was already given that it must be killed, so it already at this point is prohibited from any benefit. So the owner cannot do anything to benefit from the animal, and he can't even give it away to Hekdesh. However, if the owner did so before the verdict, right, and the ox is innocent until proven guilty. So before the verdict, it does have value. Who knows? Maybe they'll decide that it's innocent. We don't know. So if the owner decides to make it Hekdesh beforehand, the Hekdesh sets in, right? And that's it. You'll have to give it away. Or if he decides to do Shechita, but before the verdict is given, that meat is kosher. Now, next case. Mesaro l'shomer chinam ul-shoel, nose sachar ul-socher. נכנסו תחת הבעלים, מועד משלם נזק שלם, ותם משלם חצי נזק. If the owner gives his ox to any kind of watchman or borrower, whether shomer chinam is only responsible if he's negligent. He's not getting paid for it. So, but he's still doing a favor to watch something. He has to do a basic amount of watching, so he's not going to be liable. Unless he's totally negligent, then he is liable. And then shoel, a borrower, a paid bailee, or a renter, or have all higher levels of responsibility. So when the owner gives his ox to one of these people, so they come into the place of the owner, meaning whatever status the ox had under the owner, that status continues, transfers, and stays with the ox. If the ox had been mu'ad with the owner, and then it gores while it's under the watchman, so then the watchman is responsible for paying the full amount of the nezek and everything else that comes along with that. And if the shor had been tam under the owner, then it continues being tam, and then the owner, the watchman, will only have to pay half of the nezek. All right, that's the Mishnah. Two different topics here. They're similar in the sense that the owner is shifting the animal from one custodian to another, here making it ekdesh, or slaughtering it here, giving it over to a watchman, and the consequences of that. All right, Tenor Rabbanan. Shor shehemit ad shelo nigmar dino. We have a braita that expands on the Mishnah. If an animal kills someone before the verdict, mecharo machor hekdisho mukdash shechato besaro mutar. So if he said, the braita is adding case of selling. So before the verdict, innocent until proven guilty. So right now, it's permitted to have benefit from this ox. So if he sells it to someone else, the sale is a valid sale, and the buyer can use it to plow his field, whatever he wants. If in the end it should become the verdict should come down that it is liable, all right, then they'll take the ox back. But in the meantime, it's a valid sale. The hekdesh is a valid hekdesh, and if he slaughters it, it's permitted, right? Because it's still permitted, and at this point, it wasn't declared guilty yet. And if the owner gave it over to a watchman, and the watchman gave it back to the owner, it's considered given back. In other words, he fulfilled his obligation to give it back. Still talking about a short shehemit. So, right, the owner gives it to a borrower while it's in the borrower's house. It goes and kills someone, but the verdict has not been given down yet. Now, since the guy borrowed it, the borrower has an obligation to return the ox to the owner. So if he returns it at this point, can he say, I returned it to you, I fulfilled my obligation? And the answer is yes, because it still is worth money. It's still considered innocent, so he returns it. So that's it. The owner can no longer have a claim on the borrower. Hey, you never gave me back my ox. Now, if it ends up being guilty, so the borrower, depending on what level and what kind of borrower he is, and what exactly happened, if he watched it sufficiently or not. If he didn't watch it sufficiently, then the borrower will have to pay. If he watched it sufficiently, they said, I did my job, and the owner will have to pay for the cost of the damage. But the point is that since it still is worth money and one can still benefit from it, so he fulfilled his obligation in returning it. Okay, that's all before the verdict. The Baraita continues, if the verdict is already given now, and it's prohibited to have benefit from it, so it has no worth. If you try to sell it, the sale is invalid. If the owner tries to make it ekdesh, it's invalid. If he does shechita on it, well, it is dead, but you can't benefit from the meat. החזירו שומר לבית בעליו אינו מוחזר. רבי יעקב אומר אף משנגמר דינו החזירו שומר לבעליו מוחזר. But the last case is subject to a machloket. If the owner gave his ox to a borrower, and while under the borrower it went and killed someone, and now it went to Beit Din, and the Beit Din said sikila. Okay, so now the borrower, in the meantime, before they actually did the sikila, the borrower takes the animal and gives it back to the owner and says, listen, you lent me this thing, I'm giving it back to you, right? Good. We're clear now? The Tanna Kama says no, eno musad. Why? Because you return something that's worth zero. It's like returning air, right? What is this? You can't do anything with it. It is not considered returned, and the owner can come later and say, listen, I lent you an ox, you never returned it. And he can't say, oh, I returned you an ox. Yeah, that ox was a dead ox walking. It was worth zero. That's not called returning. You have to now pay for the ox that I gave you that you never returned. However, Rabbi Yaakov disagrees and says, even after the verdict is completed, if the borrower takes the ox and gives it to the owner, that's considered a returning. Here, you lent me an ox. Here's the ox. It's in front of you. Do what you want with it. Okay, yeah, in 5 minutes, the Beit Din is going to come and take it and stone it. All right, that's not my problem. The borrower says, I did my job. I returned what's coming to you. So let's analyze this machloket. Well, a couple of different explanations. What's at the root of it? Lema behakami palge. דרבנן סברי אין אומרים באיסורי הנאה הרי שלך לפניך ורבי יעקב סבר אומרים באיסורי הנאה הרי שלך לפניך. Perhaps they're arguing on a more general situation that Rabbanan say, we do not, if something is prohibited b'hana'ah, like chametz shavar alav ha'pesach. If I own chametz over Pesach and I don't get rid of it, I don't destroy it, I'm not allowed to benefit after Pesach either. So let's say a case where I borrow chametz from you before Pesach, and then I don't consume it, I don't do anything, I keep it in my possession over Pesach, and then afterwards I say, okay, I'm returning this bread to you. Now, it happens to be that it's asur b'hana'ah, so you can't even use it. So is that called returning? So Rabbanan say that returning something that is prohibited b'hana'ah and worth 0, we do not say that that's called returning. En omrim b'suan ha'areh shelcha lefanecha, and so too here, because this ox was already declared that it needs to be stoned, it's worth 0. And therefore, this is not called returning. Whereas Rabbi Yaakov, maybe in general, he thinks that even if something is prohibited b'hana'ah, it is if it's still intact, so it's here, right? This is okay. The fact that under my watch it became prohibited b'hana'ah because it went over Pesach, or it was an ox and it killed, and the verdict was that it should be killed. This is hezek that you can't see, and so, right, this is the item physically is intact, even though the legal status changed. So it's not my problem. Here, I'm giving it to you, and I am the borrower is absolved from paying anything to the owner in terms of the item itself. So maybe this is one example of a more general argument that they have about the subject. Amar Rabba lekula ama omrim b'surah hana'ah hareh shelcha lefanecha dim ken niflog le'inyan chametz bepesach. Rabba says, no, I disagree with that. In fact, everybody, both Tanakama and Rabbi Yaakov, think that if something is prohibited b'hana'ah, we do say, here, I'm giving it back to you. In other words, this was Rabbi Yaakov's opinion, because if not, then why don't they have an argument regarding chametz bepesach? We never find that there's a machloket between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yaakov about returning chametz bepesach. Everybody thinks that if I borrowed bread before Pesach and I return it after Pesach, I returned it. That's it. The owner can have no claim on me. The owner can say, well, what would you do? Why didn't you eat it before Pesach? Why didn't you get rid of it? I have the bread. Here's the bread, right? The status change is not my problem. So everybody agrees with that, because, right, we never find that there is a machloket about that. So therefore, this cannot be the explanation. So now we need a better explanation for Rabbanan. See, Rabbi Yaakov says, if you return an item that's not worth anything, it's called returning. So how come Rabbanan say it's not returning? Even though it's b'susur b'hana'ah, that shouldn't be a reason not to call it returning. Rather, they're arguing on a different issue about whether, when an ox is on trial, does the ox itself need to be present during the trial? We're not talking about the ox sitting in a fancy suit on the bench with its hands cuffed, right, sitting in the pews. Rather, we mean that the ox has to be in the possession of the Bet Din during the trial, or can it be anywhere out there and it does not need to be present in the hands of the Bet Din during the trial? That's the subject of the machloket. The rabbis think that we do not make a trial about an ox unless the ox is present and there in the hands of the Bet Din. Now, how is this relevant to this law? Damarle, rete nihali hava marak nale leagma hashta at paste letorai bida dela yachina leashtuye dina behade. Because the owner can tell the borrower, listen, if you had returned the ox to me before the verdict, then I would have had a plan. I would have taken the ox, smuggled it out to the marsh, hidden it there, so that the Bet Din wouldn't be able to find it. And if the Bet Din couldn't find it, they would not be able to go ahead with the trial, because you can't make a trial if the ox is not in the hands of the Bet Din. And so now you didn't return it to me. You let the Bet Din. You didn't have my plan. You let the Bet Din take it, and now I can't. What can I do about my litigation? I can't engage in litigation and try to compromise. See if I hid it away, and they come say, "Where's the ox?" Maybe we'll come to a compromise about it. But now I have no leverage. So that's why if the borrower did not return it before the verdict and waited only till after the verdict, so then the owner says, it's too late now. The verdict is already done. You're returning it to me now does not help me at all, right? I can't do anything with it. Sorry, this is not called returning. You need to return it beforehand when I could have had a strategy and helped out to make sure it would not come to this. That is the Tanna Kama's claim. ורבי יעקב סבר גומלין דינו של שור שלא בפניו דאמר לסוף סופים ברהבו גמרי לדינה. רבי יעקב, on the other hand, thinks that we do give a trial to an ox, even if it's not there, and that way the borrower can say to the owner, what's the difference if I gave it to you before or now? Even if I gave it to you before and you hid it away, it wouldn't have helped. They still would have made a trial, and they still would have made a verdict that it's sikila. So it makes no difference whether I gave it before or now, and just like if I gave it to you before, that would be considered valid returning. So I'm giving it to you now. It's considered valid returning, and that is what's at issue in this machloket. Good. My tama de Rabbanan. What is the source for the opinion of Rabbanan that the ox needs to be present during a trial? Hashor yisakel vegam be'alav yumat. Kimitat ha'be'alim kach mitat hashor. Ma be'alim bifnehem avshor bifanav. He's making a kesh. The pasuk talks about the ox getting stoned, and also the owner dies. It's talking about a shor muad, where from the letter of the law, even the owner should get the death penalty unless he pays kofet, but still puts these together, and therefore just like the verdict against the owner has to be present, so too the verdict against the ox must be present. All right, do you understand the charges against you, ox? Right, he says yes. Rabbi Yaakov, Bishlama be'alim bene ta'ananin, hu ela shor bar ta'antahu. Rabbi Yaakov says, no, this makes no sense. All right, there's a reason why the owner, a person, a human, has to be present during his trial, because a human being can give claims. So we need him to be there so that if he has a defense, he'll say so, right, before the verdict. Do you have anything that you want to say, even after the verdict? Right, if he says, wait, I forgot something, I actually have another witness, right? But as long as we didn't kill the human, he can give a defense. So a human needs to be there so that we make sure he presents any defense that he may have. It's not fair to give a verdict to a human being not in their presence. But an ox, can it give a claim? Is it going to say, right, raise its hoof and say, I object? What's the difference where the ox is? We don't need him to be there. That is Rabbi Yaakov's opinion. Okay, now the next part of the Mishnah, Mesarol Shomer Chinam Ul Shoel Vechule. The Mishnah taught that if an owner gives over his ox to a watchman or a borrower, then the watchman or borrower has the same status and has to pay half if it's a short tam, or full amount if it's a short mu'ad, if it causes damage, or if it causes damage while it's in the hands of the borrower. Now we have a beraita that's going to elaborate on this and talk about an animal that kills someone while it's under the custody of a borrower or a watchman. Tenora banan arba nichnesu tachat ha'be'alim eluhen shomer chinam v'ashoel noseh sachar v'asocher hargu tamin nehרגין ופטורים מן הכופר מועדין נהרגין ומשלמים את הכופר וחייבים להחזיר דמי השור לבעליו חוץ משומר חינם. There are four types of custodians that come and take the same responsibilities and liabilities of the owner, and they are shomer chinam, who is the least responsible. He's only responsible if he's negligent, and the borrower, who is the most responsible because he gets benefit from using it, and he doesn't even have to pay. And then in the middle is noseh sachar and socher, someone who gets paid for watching it or who is renting. Okay, we're going to see a machloket about the renter, which category he's in. Now, if one of these animals kills someone while it's under the hands of the custodian, if it's a short tam, it had been a short tam under the owner and it's still a short tam, then we kill the short tam, we give a sikila, and the owner or bailey does not have to pay kofir, which is right the same true for the owner, and that'll be the same will be true for the bailey. And if was a shor mu'ad under the owner, so it'll have the same laws that will apply to the bailey Israeli. It will be killed, the animal gets sikila, and the borrower will have to pay the kofir, and they also have to pay back the value of the ox to the owner, because they borrowed it, and so they have to give it back. So not only does it get killed, and they have to pay kofed, but they also have to actually return the item that they borrowed. All that is true except for the shomer chinam, because he is the least responsible. So now we have to explain what kind of case are we talking about. Amre hechi dameh. If the watchman watched it properly, then everybody should be patur. If you gave it, you locked it up in a proper way, so then none of them did anything wrong. This is honest. It's beyond their control that it broke out of its iron chains and went and killed someone. So none of these borrowers and watchmen should be liable. And if the owner did not watch it at all, he just let it loose, then shomer chinam also would be chayav, because shomer chinam is liable if he was negligent. So it can't be either of these cases. Rather, it must be an in-between case. Amreh, we're talking about a case where the watchman safeguarded it in a minimal way, but not in a superior way. He put a fence, but a fence, not a flimsy fence that could get knocked down by a wind. And so he did something, a minimal amount, enough for shomer chinam, but not enough for the others. Shomer chinam kalta lo shemirato, hanach lo kalta shemiratan. Shomer chinam, since he's not getting paid, he just has to not be negligent. He wasn't negligent. He did a standard minimum amount of security, so that's it. He doesn't have to pay back the owner, but the others, they have to have superior amount of safeguarding, and so since they didn't, they have to pay back the owner. Okay, Amre, Keman. Now, whose opinion are we following? Could be Meir Damar Shomer Damar Socher Keshomer Chinam Dame Litne Chutz Me Shomer Chinam VeHaSocher. There's a machloket about Socher. What is it like? And so the Meir thinks that the Socher has the same status as Shomer Chinam. The Shomer Chinam, he doesn't get paid, but he has to watch it. The socher, he can use it, but he's paying rent for it. So those basically cancel each other out, because he's getting benefit, but the owner also gets benefit by getting paid. And so therefore a socher has the same status of shomer chinam. Well, if this baraita is following the opinion of Rabbi Meir, then it should say everybody has to pay back the owner except for not to shomer chinam, which it says in the Baraita. I should say socher also, if it has the same law. So therefore, it can't be Rabbi Meir. Okay, that's better, because he says socher and noseh sachar have the same higher level of negligence, higher level of liability, and so they both would say that this guy has to pay because he did only a minimal watching. So if it's Rabbi Meir, well, then that also doesn't work. Nitneh chutz me shomer chinam vechulan bemoadin peturin le'inyan kofed. The first part of it is okay, except for shomer chinam. Shomer chinam does not have to pay as long as he did a minimal amount. However, according to the Biudah, there's a difference between shor tam and shor mu'ad. We're going to see this in the next Mishnah that we're going to read in just a few minutes. But the Biudah, just to introduce it, has a paradoxical view. He thinks that for a shor tam, one has to give a high level, a superior safeguarding, but for a shor mu'ad, it's enough to give a minimal safeguarding. It seems counterintuitive, because you think that a shor mu'ad, you'd have to watch it more. But we're going to see the Biudah learns this from a pasuk. Therefore, what he should say is, for a shor tam, then only the shomer chinam can get off the hook, because a shor tam, all the other watchmen have to do a higher level of watching, and since they didn't, they have to pay. But if it's a shor mu'ad, according to the Yehuda, shor mu'ad, you only have to do minimal watching, and so it should say, except for also shor mu'ad, where none of them have to pay kofir. They don't have to pay ransom to the heirs of the victim, and since they're not responsible, also, these watchmen would not, according to the Yehuda, would not have to reimburse the owner for the shor, because they did a minimal amount of safeguarding, which is sufficient for a shor mu'ad. Therefore, this baraita cannot be the opinion of Rabbi Meir. It also can't be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So, whose opinion is it? Amar Ravuna bar Chinena hamane Rabbi Eliezer he. Rabbi Eliezer, whose opinion also we will see in the upcoming Mishnah, is the most stringent. Damar en lo shemira ela sakin. The only way to truly 100% safeguard an ox is with a knife, by killing it. Once it's dead, then it won't gore anybody. Basically, the Eliezer holds all the watchmen except for Shomer Chinam liable, even if they do a high level of watching. They put iron fence and iron chains and all that. If it gets out and kills someone, so all of them will be responsible to reimburse the owner for the original ox that now has been killed by Sekila. Whether kofir or not, that depends on the shor tam, no kofir. If shor mu'ad, you would have to pay kofir. So that is consistent. The baraita is consistent with Rabbi Eliezer, and the status of socher. Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that socher is the same as noseh sachar. So both of them have a highest level of liability, and there's nothing that will stop them from having to pay, and so therefore that fits the baraita perfectly well. Abaye amar leolam keRabbi Meir uchad machalif rabba bar abu v'taneh socher kesad meshalem. Rabbi Meir omer keshomer sachar, Rabbi Yehuda omer keshomer chinam. Abaye says, actually, go back to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. This baraita is consistent with his opinion, as long as you switch around what they say regarding socher, which Rabba bar Avu conveniently does in his version of the Braita. He says that a socher, what is he compared to? Rabbi Meir says a socher is the same as shomer sachar, and Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's like a shomer chinam. According to this, everything is good, because Rabbi Meir says you need, it's necessary and sufficient to have a high level of guarding for all three guardsmen and borrowers. And so, in this case, we're talking about where he did a low level of guarding. And therefore, all three of them have to pay reimbursement to the original owner. Except for Shomer Chinam, who he was not negligent, he did a minimal amount, and that's fine. And so since Socher is like Shomer Sachar, he's included in the three, and not with the Shomer Chinam, so then that will also work perfectly fine. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Masar shoro l'shomer chinam, hizik chayab, huzak patur. Rabbi Elazar rules, if someone gives his shor to a shomer chinam, and it goes and causes damage, the shomer is liable. If it was damaged, then the shomer is exempt from paying reimbursing the owner for the amount of damage that it incurred. So now we ask about this. Amre hechidame ida kabel ale shemirat nezakav afilu huzak name lichayav v'idela kabel ale shemirat nezakav afilu hizik name lipater. What kind of case are we talking about? If this shomer chinam accepted upon himself responsibility for this ox causing damage, then it should be reciprocal. And just as he is liable to pay for its damage, he also should be liable if it gets damaged, right? In other words, he has to guard it not only to make sure that it doesn't damage others, but also guard it to make sure that no other animals will damage it. And if this shomer chinam did not accept responsibility for damages that it causes, then he should also not be liable for damage that the ox incurred. And those just make sense to be reciprocal, and he's the same responsibility should be for if it causes damage as if it receives damage. Answer is Amarava leolam shekibel alav shemirat nezakav v'acham askinan kegon shekir bo shehu nagchan. Rava says, in fact, this shomer did accept. He's shomer chinam, but he says, I also accept responsibility for it going and causing damage to others. And we're talking about a case where he also knew that this ox has a reputation of being a goring ox. It's not officially a shor mu'ad for whatever technical reason. They just didn't warn the owner. So it's not a shor mu'ad legally. Nevertheless, the shomer knows that it has a violent tendency. Ustama de milita de la Ariel Eliyahu umazik acharini kabil ale date acharini mazik umazki le ledide la sikadaate. And therefore, we can assume that the shomer chinam accepted upon himself responsibility to make sure that it would not gore others, because he knows this is violent, and he says, okay, I got it, I accept it upon myself, I'll make sure that it doesn't, I'll be responsible to make sure that it doesn't gore others. But for others coming and goring it, he did not have in mind to accept responsibility for that, because since he knew this was a violent ox, usually the other animals are scared of it, are scared of a violent ox. So he says, okay, this is a violent ox, I have to make sure that it doesn't gore others, but it's not, no one's going to start up with this one, so I don't have to guard it against injury from others. So that's the case, and that's why, yes, usually when a shomer chinam accepts responsibility for one, he will also for the other, that it won't gore, also that it won't be damaged. Both come, usually they come together, both or neither. But in a case like this, where he knows it's violent, then he's going to be very responsible to make sure it doesn't gore others, but he assumes that since it can fend for itself, the others will not start up with it. All right, now the next Mishnah, the one that we've been waiting for, that gives the three opinions, and the Gemara will bring even a fourth opinion about the level of safeguarding that an owner has to have over the oxen that he owns. Earlier in the Gemara, we applied this also to a watchman or borrower from the owner, but now we're focusing on the owner himself. When is he liable to pay and when not? So, כששרו בעליו במוסריו ונעל בפניו כראוי ויעשה והזיק אחד תם ואחד מועד חייב דברי רבי מאיר. If the owner tied his ox to a fence or locked a gate, a regular gate, as is normal, karaui. This here we're talking about a minimal standard, right? It's a regular standard, just a kind of flimsy gate that if a strong wind comes, it would knock it down. We're not talking about iron chains, but rather it just locked it up in a regular way, just with a rope or something. And so this is a minimal standard, and it goes out and is able to break away, and it causes damage. According to the Meir, whether it's tam or mu'ad, one is liable to pay. Tam, he'll pay half. For mu'ad, he'll pay full amount of nezek, because he didn't do superior guarding. If he did maximum security, then the Meir would say that is necessary and sufficient. If it gets out of maximum security, then the owner does not have to pay. But here he does have to, because he only did minimum security. According to Meir, there is no distinction between the level of safeguarding for a tam and mu'ad. Both of them, minimum security is not enough, maximum security is enough. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, tam hayav u'mu'ad patush ne'emar ve'lo yishmerenu be'alav ve'shamur hu zeh. Rabbi Yehuda says, if it had minimum security, then for a tam, one is liable. So for that, he agrees with Rabbi Meir. But paradoxically, he says, for a mu'ad, as long as it had minimum security, it's necessary and that's sufficient, because the pasuk says regarding mu'ad, ve'lo yishmerenu be'alav. Right over here, it says, if it was known that it was shor mu'ad because it killed before, and still velo yishmerenu be'alav, so velo yishmerenu, this pasuk, we're going to see how he learns it, actually reduces his level of responsibility. So as long as he, that means if he didn't watch it at all, then it would be chayah. But as long as he did some shemirah, so that's sufficient. And so Shamur, he did some Shemirah. So Mu'ad, paradoxically, requires less. So according to Yehuda, there is a distinction between Tam and Mu'ad. Tam agrees with Meir, requires the superior level. For Mu'ad, minimum level is enough. Rabbi Eliezer omed en lo shemira ela sakin. Rabbi Eliezer, however, says there is no level of safeguarding that is sufficient. Even maximum security is not enough. If the ox gets out, you are responsible. So, you better do whatever you can. If you really want to be 100% sure that you won't be liable, then take a knife and kill the ox, and then you'll know it doesn't kill anyone. What is the source of Rabbi Meir? He starts with the premise that the societal practice, the normal practice, go out there and do a survey. The communal standard is that people don't watch their oxen at all. That was at least, before the Torah. So the Torah comes along and says, listen, you're going to be responsible for your shortam to pay half, because the Torah wants to elevate from zero, what people usually did, to a low level, at least some level of safeguarding. So that's why for short time you need a minimum level. And then the Torah in the next paragraph, when talking about Shor Mu'ad, and it says if it goes out and kills, and he still didn't guard it, and he kills, so you see V'lo Yishmerenu means that a Shor Mu'ad needs even higher level. So far we have communal standard used to be 0. Then Torah says for short time, do 50%, right, minimum security. And then it adds for Mu'ad, you need maximum security. Okay, so far so good. And then and the last step of his argument is we're going to make a gezerah shava of negicha said regarding tam, and the same word regarding mu'ad, that we're going to take the level of tam and apply a level of mu'ad and apply it to tam as well. And so to repeat the argument, used to be 0, then Torah says tam 50%, mu'ad 100%, but then gezerah shava, take that 100% that's required for tam, apply it to that's required for mu'ad, apply it to tam as well. And so now the conclusion is for Rabbi Meir, one needs maximum security for tam and mu'ad. As long as you have maximum security, then you're good. If it goes out and somehow breaks out of those iron chains, then you're not responsible for either. Rabbi Yehuda, however, starts off with a different premise, that the communal standard before the Torah was that people do a minimal standard of safeguarding for their oxen. So Torah doesn't have to say anything about that. That people are already doing. And then Torah says, listen, for a short time you're going to have to pay half. That way people will do an extra level of guarding. So for a short time we're going from minimal to maximum security. And then after the next paragraph from Mu'ad says, oh, he didn't safeguard it. And that seems to be elevating even more, right? But the problem is there already, for a time you already need maximum security. So now we're going to say maximum security? What else is there? There is a exegetical principle that says if you have a ribuy after a ribuy, an inclusion and then another inclusion, or amplification and another amplification, since there's nowhere else to go, you already included everything, you already included the highest level. So then it's kind of like when you multiply 2 negatives makes a positive. So here 2 positive actually makes a negative, and so short tam was already at maximum. The ribuy of V'lo Yishmerenu moves mu'ad down a level. All you need is minimum security for a short mu'ad. And if you'll think, well, remember that gezerah shava, we have the word negicha in both, so maybe I should take the short tam and also move it down to the level of mu'ad, and now say that both of them you only need minimum security. No, don't do that, because the word V'lo Yishmerenu says this one for mu'ad, that's the one that you move down, but short tam, leave it there. Now we ask about this derivation. You're using for double duty, right? You already used it to move mu'ad down a level. How can you use it now also to stop us from making a gezerah shava of moving the short tam down a level? And the answer is yes, we're going to use it for double duty, because it could have said a shorter form of the verb, and instead it uses a longer form with an extra pronoun that does not watch it, and so it says it, meaning this specific one that you move down a level, muad, but not short tam. And therefore, we conclude that according to the Yehuda, right, this is how he learns it. We start off with the baseline of minimum security, and then the Torah says short tam, you need more than the communal standard. Short tam goes up. Muad, we would think, has to be even higher because of the pasuk, but you can't go higher, so therefore the pasuk says go lower, and we do not apply the gezerah shava. Now, there's another opinion that was not mentioned in the Braita, in the Mishnah, but here it is in the Braita. It's the most lenient. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Echad tam v'echad muad shemaro shemira pechuta patur. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, not to be confused with Rabbi Eliezer, who is Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol ben Hurkenus, and the Mishnah. This Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, whether it's tam or muad, all you have to do is minimum security. If you did minimum security, then that's necessary, but that's sufficient. My ta'ama sabar Rabbi Yehuda damar muad b'shmira pechuta sagile ve'yalif negicha letam unegicha lemuad. What's his derivation? It's the same as we had for Rabbi Yehuda. You started with minimum; it was the communal standard. Tam goes up a level. Muad, you can't go up a level, so you go down a level. But Rabbi Eliezer adds to that also the gezerah shava, that we're comparing the two, and since muad is only minimum security, so too tam also comes down to minimum security, and he's not going to learn anything from the extra pronoun at the end. Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava lo patar Rabbi Yehuda ela sad ha'ada'a shebo aval sad tamut bimkoma omedet. Rav Ada bar Ahava is coming to the rescue to explain the paradox of Rabbi Yehuda, that impossible to say that for a short muad the owner would pay less than if it was a short tam, that there would be a case where he wouldn't have, let's say it was minimum security, he wouldn't have to pay for a short muad, but he would have to pay for a short tam. That doesn't make any sense. Rather, he explains that according to the Yehuda, when he says minimum security, that was only for the half amount of the payment added because it's a short muad, but the payment that is required as a short tam remains even after it becomes a short muad. In other words, according to this, we're saying that when a short tam, your owner pays half. When it becomes a short muad and pays full, that full amount is actually made up of two parts. It's the same payment for a short tam that was required all along, plus another 50% as a short muad. Therefore, in the case where it's a short tam and he only did minimum security, he's going to have to pay. Okay, and now let's say it's a short mu'ad, and it kills with minimum and damages with minimum security. Well, in that case, you're still going to have to pay as a short tam, because if it were a short tam, you'd have to pay half. So you still have to pay half. The additional amount, well, if you did minimum security, you don't have to pay. If you did no security, then you would have to pay. And therefore, for a short mu'ad, there's no case where for a short mu'ad you would have to pay less than if it was a short tam. Okay, so that's very helpful. Amar Rav, mu'ad lekeren yamin, eno mu'ad lekeren simol. Rav teaches us an interesting chidush, that if an animal is forewarned regarding its right horn, it caused damage, gored and caused damage with its right horn 3 times, so now it's going to be mu'ad for its right horn, but it's a righty and it doesn't gore with its left horn, then it is considered still tam for its left horn. So you could have a possibility where it would pay one amount if it causes damage with its right horn and a different amount with its left horn. Now, we have to see what kind of case is he talking about, and according to whom is he saying that this would be true. Amre aliba deman. Who is Rav giving this chidush according to? I aliba de Rabbi Meir ha'amar echad tam be'echad mu'ad shemira me'ola ba'eh. If he's following Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Meir made no distinction between tam and mu'ad, that one requires to have maximum security. So then, in what case would there be a difference between the right and the left? if the owner provided maximum security, so he did everything he needs to do, and therefore he does not have to pay anything, whether with the right or the left, right? You did maximum security, that is necessary. It's also sufficient, so he'd be totally patur. If he did minimum security, right, between more than minimum but less than maximum, well, in that case, if he gored with the right one, that would be mu'ad, and so he has to pay a full amount for the damages, and if it was with the left one, then there'll be half amount of damages. So yes, there is a difference between right and left, but this is obvious. We already know from the Mishnah that we saw earlier that a shorty can be mu'ad for a certain type of behavior and not other types of behavior. So this is not any chidush here that he's telling us. So it can't be that this is a bimeir. I aliba de biuda, my iria keren semol, afilu beyamin name it be sad tamut v'it be sad mu'edet. And if we're following Rabbi Yehuda, so then what does it matter if it's the right or the left? Even for the right, also there's going to be a half of that payment is going to be because it's tam, and the other half because it's mu'ad. In other words, if we follow Rav Ada bar Ahava, who we just mentioned, well then, let's say according to the Biuda, the owner does a minimum amount of security. Okay, so then if it goes with the right side, that's mu'ad, but mu'ad includes tam, so it's going to pay half, right? But since he did minimum security, he doesn't have to pay for the 50% of the mu'ad part, so he pays half. And if he did it with the left side, which is tam, and he only did minimum security, so he has to pay half, right? Because that's tam. So then actually there would be no distinction between the right and the left if you accept Rav Ada bar Ahava's interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda. So it can't be Rabbi Meir and it can't be Rabbi Yehuda, at least not according to Rav Ada bar Ahava's interpretation. So we answer, Amre le'olam ki Rabbi Yehuda ve'la sebira le Rav Ada bar Ahava. In fact, Rav is following Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and he does not agree with Rav Ada bar Ahava. V'achikamar ki ha'gavna hu demashkach be sad tamut u'moedet. And Rav is teaching us a very interesting chidush in this case, that if you have this animal whose right side is mu'ad and left horn is not, and the owner does minimum security, if it goes with its right horn, well, it did sufficient amount of safeguarding for a mu'ad, because it did minimum security, so therefore he pays 0. But if it goes with its left horn, that horn is tam, and according to the Biuda, for tam you need maximum security, and he didn't do that, so he will have to pay half. So he's just pointing out that you can have this paradoxical situation, not just with two different cases of two different oxen, but even two sides of the very same ox. So yes, this is a paradox, and paradox remains in place because Rav does not agree with Rav Ada bar Ahava. So we see Rav Ada bar Ahava's explanation is not universal. How else can we explain the paradox? It's possible to explain that when the shorta is mu'ad, then everybody knows it gets a publicity that it's mu'ad, so everybody will stay away from it, and therefore it requires less amount of safeguarding by the owner, because everybody knows that everyone will stay away from it. Kind of like, motorcycles make a lot of big noise, more than necessary. They put noisemakers in it, and that way everybody knows motorcycle is dangerous, and that way people will stay away from it. Right, aval mu'ad legamre la mashkachat be sad tamut kelal. But if the ox was all mu'ad, both sides are mu'ad, then you would not be able. Then there would not be any ta'am aspect of it at all, and so that is Rav's chidush. All right, now finally, let's finish the masech, the perek off. Rabbi Eliezer omer en lo shemira ela sakin. Rabbi Eliezer says a shor mu'ad, there's no way to properly safeguard it and be beyond liability. If it's a shor mu'ad, I mean it's dangerous, the only way to ensure you won't have to pay is with a knife by killing it. Rabbi Eliezer, however, agrees with the previous Tanaim in the Mishnah that if it's tam, then maximum security is sufficient. Amar Rabba, my Tamad Rabbi Eliezer was Rabbi Eliezer's source that a shor mu'ad, you can't safeguard it. Amar Kera, velo yishmerenu, shub en lo shemira lazeh. When he interprets the words that a shor mu'ad, if you did not watch it, it's not just describing a case where you did not watch it properly, it's actually saying you cannot watch it sufficiently. There's nothing you can do to watch it sufficiently, and therefore, the only thing you could do to make sure you don't have to pay is to kill it. There, even maximum security is not enough. Abaye asks a good question. If you're interpreting lo yishmerenu as there is no way to safeguard it sufficiently, then how about in the case where someone digs a pit and then it says velo yechasenu and he doesn't cover it, and someone falls in, then he is liable. So it seems in a regular reading to mean that if you didn't cover it, but if you did cover it, it would be okay. But Rabbi Eliezer, according to your reading, it should be, you would interpret this to mean that if I dug a pit, there is no way I can adequately cover it and not be liable, right? Would you say that that's true? Maybe you'll say yes, in fact, that's true. If you dig a pit, you're responsible, and there's no way to not be responsible even by covering it with a solid cover. But obviously that's not true, because the Mishnah says if someone dug a pit, but then he covers it appropriately, and nevertheless, even though he did a good covering, an ox or a donkey fell into it, he is exempt. So you see that it is possible to cover a hole adequately, and so it doesn't make sense to interpret velo yishmerenu that way, because then you have to interpret velo yichasenu that way, and that's not a good interpretation of velo yichasenu. So therefore, we should not interpret velo yishmerenu either as there's no way to properly guard it. It just means that you didn't guard it. Ela amar Abaye, so rather another derivation for Rabbi Eliezer. Hainu ta'amed Rabbi Eliezer kede tanya Rabbi Natan omer minayin shelo yigadel adam kelev ra betoch beto va'al yamid sulam ra'ua betoch beto shenemar velo tasim damim bebetecha. We're going to follow the baraita where Rabbi Natan teaches. How do you know that a person should not raise a vicious dog in his house? It's dangerous. And should not keep an unstable ladder in his house, right? People are going to use it unknowingly, and they're going to fall. As Pasuk says, do not bring blood into your house. Don't bring guilt into your house by allowing hazardous situation to continue. So these aren't the only two examples. There's just two examples, but there's a general rule not to have dangerous things around. You're responsible. Even beforehand, you have to, right? Chacham enav berosho, and he sees that this is good. This can cause danger. So therefore, don't keep it around. The same thing. That's what this is as a source. If you have a shor and it already gored 3 times, obviously this is a dangerous item, right? This is the same as a vicious dog, and so there's nothing you can do if just by being around, that is dangerous, and therefore the only way to really safeguard it is by getting rid of it, by doing shechita and having a nice barbecue. Hadran alach shor shenagach arba'a v'chamisha.